Hey everyone, this is Dr. Hurricane Hal Needham live in Galveston, Texas. Live footage of the hurricane landfall for Hurricane Nicholas, making landfall just south of me along the upper Texas coast down by Freeport. Maximum sustained winds are around 75 miles an hour near the point of landfall. Here in Galveston, we have tropical storm force winds. We have compound flooding underway. I'm going to explain what that means. So storm surge is really salt water that pushes on shore in a landfalling hurricane. If you're on the beach, it looks like basically high tides. Right now, we don't have much of a beach. The waves are washing right up to the sand dunes, but I want to show you what this looks like. Here I'm closer to downtown Galveston, what we call north of Broadway, in a low-lying community that's quite flood prone. And I want to show you what this looks like here. We actually have storm surge now pushing backwards up the storm drains. I'm going to show you what that looks like and explain compound flooding. So typically heavy rainfall drains out, but you can see here there's a storm drain and you can see the water's actually coming up the storm drain. You see those you can see the white bubbles there coming up. So that's water coming up the storm drain. We're now moving towards high tide. Water levels now are generally running at least 2 to 3 feet above normal on the island. Typically, water levels would be about 1.5 feet on the tide gauge right now, but they're running maybe about 3.5 to 4.5 feet on the tide gauge. So that's pushing salt water backwards up the storm drains, and then all this heavy water cannot really drain too well. So that's something that we call compound flooding. It's from flooding from both heavy rain and storm surge. Because the water's coming backwards up the drain, there's really nowhere for all this rain to drain to. So I'm again in a low-lying area in Galveston. We're starting to see about, I don't know, maybe 6 inches to a foot of water above the roadway. I'm going to take you to a flood meter that I installed today at a friend of mine's house. My friend Mason let me install a flood meter, and Mason has what's called an elevation certificate. This is an official survey of your property. It tells you how high the ground is and how high your house is, and we use that to put up a community flood meter so we can do some flood monitoring here in Galveston, Texas. You know, I know it's really windy. People are saying all the way over by Crystal Beach on the Bolivar Peninsula, and here in Galveston Island, even over through Bay City and Freeport, we've had some strong winds, some isolated, I would say some isolated power outages here on the island so far, and a few trees that have been down. But for the most part, it looks like the power is still on in Galveston Island. I'm going to show you our community flood meter over here. So we have a flood meter here. You can see it there by the porch, and the base of that flood meter is at right there. There's that stick over there. It's calibrated. The base of that flood meter is at 5.5 feet, and the water is about 6 inches below that. So I think the water right here is about 5 feet on the tide gauge. So we're using that to actually calibrate and get an idea for how deep the water is. Again, I'm in downtown Galveston, where we're starting to see some ponding and some flooding of water on the roadways. People have been mentioning their houses are shaking. We're getting a lot of squally weather. A lot of people had questions, how much worse is it going to get? I think this is really the worst of it for Galveston. So the next couple hours, this is going to be the worst of it. Sustained winds at times in the 40s. Last hour, I think we had sustained winds of 32 miles an hour with gusts to 51. But I think we're definitely getting tropical storm force wind gusts here in the island. It's been really squally. A lot of people reporting that trees are shaking. A few trees are down. We have some scattered power outages here on the island, ponding of water downtown, but a lot of people are saying their house is shaking. They're wondering how much worse it's going to get. We're really squally here on Galveston Island right now, and again, we have some high water in parts, low-lying areas of downtown. I have not seen any vehicles flooded yet, but in general, it's pretty squally, and we're definitely getting a little bit of high water here on the island. Kathy says the winds are howling, but the frogs are loving it. So you can really hear, and that's pretty common. I've seen that a lot. I remember Tropical Storm Cristobal last year in Mississippi, just how many frogs were out after the storm. I'm driving here in a low-lying area of Galveston. There's a bit of ponding of water over the roadway. I'm very familiar with this. This is my hometown, so I very much know these streets. But be careful. You do not want to be driving on unfamiliar streets tonight. That's a big concern because of high water wherever you are. Hey, for friends of ours in, say, the southern part of Metro Houston, your winds haven't really picked up yet. At midnight, the winds at Hobby Airport were 18 miles an hour with, I think, gusts in the 20s. So your stronger winds are going to come closer to daybreak and after dawn tomorrow. And that area, the southern part of Metro Houston, up by Pearland and Friendswood, you could get some pretty strong winds. I think actually even stronger than here in Galveston and Bolivar, because the core of the storm is going to move really a little bit west of Galveston and Galveston Bay. So areas like southern part of Houston, I think, could end up with some pretty good wind impacts from here. Be careful out there, everybody. Use your situational awareness, and certainly be careful. I would not be surprised to see some trees down in places like Galveston, and certainly down the coast by the Galveston West End and down by Freeport. So thanks, Tim. Appreciate your I wanted to explain a little bit why I do storm documentation, and y'all that have been following me, it's not about hype or about any kind of drama. I just like to show, in 2 videos ago, I just said there's no flooding. I don't need to try to hype things up. I just report what I see. And one reason I do that is because I feel sometimes the mainstream media sometimes hypes things up. Certain media channels, try to exaggerate things or dramatize things. I never want to do that. If I do not see storm damage, I'm going to tell you I do not see storm damage. End of story. Here I am crossing Broadway in Galveston. Again, it's a bit squally. The next couple hours, this is the worst of it here in Galveston. Sustained winds, certainly we've already seen in the 30s with gusts in the 50s. I'm over here at St. Patrick's Church. I wasn't planning to go past here, but this is a very historic place. This is the largest building that was raised during Galveston's grade raising. 700 men were under that building with jack screws. They basically raised that church on the beat of a drum, if you can believe it. This is in the grade raising after the 1900 storm. Galveston Island was raised as high as 17 feet. Pretty squally here in Galveston. I chose to be in Galveston even though landfall was down by Freeport, really because this storm is very asymmetric. What I mean by that, it's not the typical presentation where you have symmetry and you have a ring of showers and thunderstorms around the eye. In this storm, Nicholas, the activity, the really strong showers and thunderstorms are offset to the north and to the east. We're getting more squally weather right now here in Galveston than I think they're getting down the coast in Freeport, even though landfall is down by Freeport. Friends over in Beaumont, Port Arthur, those areas, you're not going to see quite as strong winds as we're seeing on the west end of Galveston Bay, but the rainfall is really offset in this storm well to the east. And I think you'll end up with higher rainfall totals, but it'll be delayed. You haven't seen that much action yet, but it's coming tomorrow and tomorrow night, I think. So if you're in Beaumont, Port Arthur, don't let your guard down. And even our friends in Southwest Louisiana, you've seen some heavy rain bands, but it's really going to pick up tomorrow night, and even into the day Wednesday. It looks like Nicholas could become really a stalled out depression near the Texas-Louisiana border. That's a concern for our friends east of the center of circulation. This is a very lopsided storm. Sometimes we see hurricane maps where we see the hurricane symbol or the tropical storm symbol. In a storm like Nicholas, that's really the western periphery of the impacts because it's so offset to the east. So if you're well east of landfall, you still could see the heaviest rain, the strongest winds as well. I'm here in Galveston where it's been pretty squally. I started off by driving down by some areas that saw the ponding of water. I think the water's generally 4.5 to 5 feet on the tide gauge here in Galveston. That's enough to put some water downtown and some of those low-lying communities north of Broadway. Any tornadoes in Galveston? That comes in from one of my close friends, David Willie D. Willingham. That's a great question. Tornadoes are always a concern if you get east of landfall. I think with this storm, I just have the gut feeling we're not going to see tons of tornadoes. Typically, we see more tornadoes with a more powerful storm. Tornadoes happen when the strong onshore winds have friction with the land. I haven't heard anything about that or really seen specific warnings about tornadoes, but if they're are tornadoes in a hurricane, it's typically offset well to the east of landfall. And so Houston, Galveston, over by Beaumont, Port Arthur, really are those areas. Typically I think tornadoes tend to form where we get those really elongated bands as well. And some of those bands I think may set up more over towards Beaumont, Port Arthur. So I've not heard anything about tornadoes, but if we did see that threat, it might actually be farther east than Galveston Bay. Pretty squally out here. Question came in, have I seen power outages in Galveston? I have, especially out by 61st and Seawall, out by Walmart. Friends of mine over by 78th and Seawall said the power's out. Power's been flickering on and off by 69th and Seawall. Not widespread yet on the island, but there have been some power outages. You can see it's getting pretty squally again as I get closer to Seawall. The wind generally is picking up as we get closer to Seawall because it's an onshore wind. There's less to block the wind out here. Power out by Walmart, says Willie D. So yeah, that area, I saw power outages by 61st and Seawall, and areas farther west than that do have their power out. If you can keep flashlight with batteries, if you can even keep a battery powered radio, things like that, you'll be doing well. Pretty squally here. I'm up here on Seawall where the winds are definitely stronger. Question, is Waffle House open? That's the $1 million question. Waffle House is one of the most durable, resilient places you're going to find, and they're often open in storms. Power's out on Cove View Boulevard. If you have power and you are up all night with the storm, you can check out a podcast I did with Waffle House about their emergency response. That's just on GeoTrek, geo-trek.com. Go to geotrek.com, that's geo-trek.com. And on the upper right, you can pull down and listen to a podcast about when I interviewed Waffle House about their emergency response. Pretty squally up here on the seawall. You can see here, there's a flag up here, and you can really see things are blowing around here pretty good up on Seawall Boulevard. It's an onshore wind, so we're really getting the worst of it here by the seawall. It's definitely sustained at least in the mid-30s, but I think we're really seeing tropical storm force winds quite a bit here. I think up here we're getting sustained winds in the 40s with gusts probably to the 50s or 60s. Oh yeah, check this out, y'all. I mean, this is it. This is Hurricane Nicholas. This is about the worst we're going to see in Galveston. I mean, this is really coming in now. I've heard about a few trees coming down, scattered power outages, but this is really hitting us. This is the hardest stuff I've seen, and this is really one of the main squall bands that we're going to see for this storm. So just hang on tight if you're here in Galveston. The next couple, I would say the next hour or two are probably the worst of it. You can really see the wind there blowing the rain over the fence. This is in Galveston, Texas. I'm right off the seawall. We're getting the strongest wind impacts by seawall. This is an onshore wind that's pushing salt water about 3 feet above normal here. We don't have much of a beach at all in Galveston. I took y'all downtown in some of the low-lying areas. We saw actually stormwater coming up the drains. So low-lying areas here of the city are starting to flood. We're here in Galveston documenting Hurricane Nicholas. That's right, Nicholas was a tropical storm today, strengthened into a hurricane. We're getting strong winds here on the Texas coast. People were asking about power outages. We've had some isolated power outages here in the city of Galveston. From what I hear, Galveston West End has some power outages. And we're expecting Metro Houston is really going to get into the game a little bit later. Hobby Airport at midnight, the winds were sustained at 18 miles an hour. Boy, they're going to pick up through the night. And out by Hobby, I think Friendswood, Pearland, that area, southern part of Houston, you're going to actually see some pretty formidable winds closer to dawn. I think sustained perhaps around 50 with higher gusts, possibly gust into the 60s. I'm here on Galveston Island where we're seeing tropical storm force winds from Hurricane Nicholas made landfall down the coast by Freeport. Yeah, Tiki's getting pounded and siding off a home in Tiki Island that's just north of Galveston Island. So we can expect that typical type of damage, shingles off of houses, trees down, power outages. That's usually coming from winds that are 50 knots or 57 miles an hour. We said that was upgraded from unlikely to possible here in the Houston-Galveston corridor. That's because Nicholas started taking a track farther to the east and it intensified into a hurricane. That was not anticipated earlier today. This storm's been a bit unpredictable. The center of circulation has reformed several times. Kathy said there she's watching from Crystal Beach. Also, you know, I have not seen as many storm chasers in this storm, and that's, I think, because of the recent changes. Just, you know, 12 hours ago, we were thinking that Nicholas would be a tropical storm. Typically, storm chasers don't come out as much for tropical storms, and here we are with, you know, hurricane conditions along the Texas coast. I'm here on the seawall by, I think, around 35th and Seawall is where I'm documenting this. You can see the impacts of Hurricane Nicholas. Strong winds. Again, friends of ours that are watching from Metro Houston, the winds have not really picked up yet. The action is starting here closer to the coast by Galveston where we have tropical storm force winds, but southern part of Houston's going to get hit pretty hard by this closer to dawn. I know a lot of us by the coast are not sleeping at all. Our houses are shaking. Wind bands coming across the island. It's just not really possible to sleep when your house is shaking. Has it made landfall yet? The last I checked about 20 minutes ago, it had not, but it was close. I wouldn't doubt if it has made landfall. Maximum sustained winds I'm expecting are around 75 miles an hour. Here in Galveston Island, the winds are a little bit less than that, but it's pretty squally. The activity is really most intense off to the east and north of landfall. Conditions in Metro Houston will really start deteriorating through the night and be worse in the hours around dawn and after dawn. Low-lying areas of Galveston Island now are starting to flood. In the beginning of this broadcast, I documented water coming backwards through the storm drains, and all this rain is not going to flood. Jenny said that it has made landfall about 10 minutes ago, according to the Weather Channel. Reed Timmer was down by the Matagorda area. A lot of storm chasers really want to get close to the area of landfall, which is great documentation. I like to, if possible, document both wind and flooding. So here the traffic lights are out. I'm at 39th and Seawall in Galveston, and it looks like there's at least some scattered power outages. We have a street light working, but all of the businesses and homes are out of power here at 39th and Seawall. The street lights are working, but that intersection, there was no traffic light working. Thanks for the updates, everybody. So Nicholas has made landfall, I suppose, down closer to Freeport. A lot of action here, though, well east of landfall. And this is going to be a prolonged storm event, but it's very asymmetric. A lot of the activity is north and east of landfall. This is the worst of it for Galveston Island. If we can make it through the next couple hours, we're really home free. I'm seeing a lot of transformers blowing because it looks like lightning on the horizon, but it's blue lightning. When you see what looks like blue and green lightning, that's usually not lightning. It's transformers popping from wind action or from trees falling on power lines. We're starting to see a lot of that really squally weather. We have over 200 people following now on the live stream. I mean, what else are you going to do? People are not sleeping on the island with this squally weather. People's homes are shaking. Had a report of siding off on a home in Tiki Island. Once you start getting siding stripped off houses, you often get some shingles that come off as well. The concern when you get shingles off is that you can start to get wind-driven rain damage in your homes, and so that's a big concern as well. Do I think it's going to turn north? You know, the last I saw on the latest advisory, the movement was to the north-northeast, so that's the center of circulation. But keep in mind with a storm like Nicholas, you know, really when we see that circulation center, that's really the western periphery of the impacts. And so the impacts and the squally weather are really off to the east and off to the north. Looks like widespread power outage here now along the seawall out by the convention center. Half an hour ago, power was on here, and now it's off. I'm out by the San Luis, and there appears to be no power. So this is pretty dark and pretty stormy night here on Galveston Island. The winds are blowing from left to right. If you're familiar with the island, the beach is off just to my left. So that's an onshore wind. There's not much beach at all. The salt water is pushing right up to the dunes. We're looking at about a 3-foot storm surge. It looks like there may be a power crew here. I'm going to see what's going on up ahead here. Yeah, things tumbling around. I saw a lot of trash cans blowing around. Definitely we have at least tropical storm force winds. These are either news crews, or that might have been a news crew there, I think. Yeah, I'm getting over by the Kroger where it looks like there is generally some power outages up here. Let's see what this looks like. The traffic lights are not working here. Really strong winds. This is about the worst of it for Galveston Island over the next couple hours. This is really the worst of what we're expected to find. So the lights here were on 30 minutes ago. Now they're off. Really squally conditions here in Galveston Island. I'd say the next couple hours, this is the worst that we're going to find here in Galveston. If we can make it through this, once we get to dawn, I think we're more or less home free in Galveston, but conditions are going to deteriorate for Metro Houston. And then Beaumont, Port Arthur, I think the worst conditions are going to come Tuesday afternoon and maybe evening. I'm concerned about some of those long lines of squalls are setting up, and they're going to be east of Galveston Bay. Flood potential definitely there for Beaumont, Port Arthur, getting into Tuesday, I believe. Yeah, road barricades are blowing around the Strand, Claudia said. I saw that there were some traffic cones and road barricades around, and you generally don't want to see that in tropical storm force wind conditions. Nicholas made landfall as a hurricane. Very few people will see hurricane force winds. To have a hurricane force wind, you need a sustained wind exceeding 74 miles an hour. Maybe a very limited part of the Texas coast would see that. Generally, we're seeing tropical storm force winds, but this is pretty squally here. We're seeing definitely wind gusts in the mid 50s to 60s here. That's usually enough to start getting some widespread power outages. Power is out here on Galveston Island. The street lights are working up to 61st Street, but now, beyond 61st, it just looks like a black hole. That's getting out towards Walmart. There's very few people out here. This is central area of Island. Yeah, house is rocking. Carla saying that her house is rocking. This is getting out towards Walmart on Seawall Boulevard. No traffic lights and very few people out here. Typically when I'm in a hurricane zone, I'll see other storm chasers, but most storm chasers, I think a lot of storm chasers didn't come out for this storm because it was, mostly expected to be a tropical storm. I think a lot of chasers didn't come in for it. I'm here because this is in my hometown. I live in Galveston. I'm very familiar with the area here. I run Galveston Hurricane Tour, which talks about the history of Galveston's hurricanes. This is the first hurricane to make landfall here on coastal Texas since last July, when we had Hurricane Hannah make landfall south of Corpus Christi. We're expecting a 3 to 5 foot storm surge here in Galveston Island. That'll push salt water up to the dunes, and definitely some high water in town. Pretty squally here. Looks like I'm driving into a black hole, but I want to explain where I'm at right now. I'm driving on Seawall Boulevard in Galveston. This is the highest ground within like 50 miles. This is elevated after the 1900 storm. This part of Galveston was elevated as high as 17 feet. This is high ground. I'm very familiar with it. I'm driving around my hometown. And so, I just wanted to encourage people to be careful about driving around unfamiliar areas in floodwater. I'm at about, 15, 16 feet above sea level here. Actually, I think seawall comes in at about 14 feet on the tide gauge. So you can see out here, if you could see the conditions. Actually, I'm pointing my high beams that's pointing out towards the Gulf. I caught a little glimpse of the waves. They're coming up near the base of the dunes. But I wanted to explain, I'm driving on high ground. I'm on seawall. There's very little debris that can really hit me. These are really stormy conditions, but, there's no other traffic out here. I'm not concerned at all for my safety, to be honest, because I'm on the highest ground around. But just be careful. I wanted to communicate that I'm very familiar with where I'm driving. You do not want to be driving around areas that you're not familiar with. Do not drive through floodwater. We have 159 people on the broadcast right now. Really squally conditions. I'm here in Galveston Island. We don't have power west of 61st Street. Sustained winds here have to be tropical storm force with gusts on the higher end of tropical storm force. So that's enough to bring down some trees. Definitely enough to cause some power outages. Nicholas intensified into a hurricane and made landfall now down by Freeport as a Category 1 hurricane. A lot of people said, are we in more danger because it's a hurricane? Well, the winds are definitely stronger than they were previously forecast. And so we're seeing our houses shake. We're seeing maybe a little bit of siding. Yeah, Willie D, man, appreciate you. I want to talk to you about Willie D. Willie D is a tourism ambassador and a tourism expert, and just really an expert in the area with tourism and hospitality. He often drives Galveston Hurricane Tour that leaves every day from Galveston Experience Company at 15th and Seawall. And something that we say on Galveston Hurricane Tour is that you run from the water and hide from the wind. It means you absolutely need to get out of a flood zone if you're below flood level, or you're going to drown. But from the wind, you can hide from it if you can get behind a strong enough shelter. So the street lights are on here closer to Kroger. I'm passing Kroger right now. I'm here on Seawall Boulevard. There's really squally here, just really picking up. We're expecting the strongest winds to be really west of Galveston Bay, even getting into the southern part of Houston Metro, expecting stronger winds, especially closer to daybreak. East of Galveston Bay, winds will not be as strong, but we're going to see some of these heavy rain bands will certainly extend over towards Winnie, Crystal Beach, over by Beaumont, Port Arthur. Friends of ours on the Bolivar Peninsula said it's shaking pretty good. There were reports earlier that there's debris on Highway 87. That's really the coastal road there across Bolivar Peninsula. With a 4 to 5 foot storm surge, that's enough to wash waves over Highway 87 and put some big rocks and boulders on the road there. Here we are on Seawall Boulevard. So this is a barrier that's blown into the road. I'm out really kind of over by 35th and Seawall, where we have a barrier here in the road. So you have to be careful of things like that if you're driving around. I'm pretty close here to, I think I'm out sort of by Academy here. It's a pretty squally. Seawall is a decent place to drive in a storm because there is really not that much debris. There's an onshore wind. The beach is just to my right. So there's really nothing. And you want to think about that if you're ever in storm conditions. Always think about what's upwind from you. Right now, what's upwind from me is the Gulf of Mexico. So there's really not that much debris that could cross my path. Thanks, Jenny. So it's being reported that Nicholas made landfall at 12:30 a.m. I'm over on Galveston Island, pretty well east of the landfall point, but this storm is very asymmetric. A lot of the strongest winds and heaviest rain are well east of landfall. You can see what it looks like here over by Academy. Really blowing here. I'm at around 44th and Seawall in Galveston. Friends watching from Louisiana, you're not going to see these strong winds like we're seeing here in Galveston Island, but I'm concerned. It looks like Nicholas will slow down and actually be a depression into like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, possibly a tropical depression near the Texas-Louisiana border or in southwest Louisiana. That's a concern with prolonged rainfall in places even like, eventually over towards Lake Charles and Baton Rouge. I'm concerned about prolonged rains later this week. This is live footage of Hurricane Nicholas making landfall as a Category 1 hurricane in coastal Texas. I'm in Galveston, where we're not seeing hurricane force winds, but these are, pretty strong tropical storm force winds, and we have some scattered power outages. 167 people on the live broadcast. Really appreciate the feedback, everyone. If you see high water at your property, if you can safely document that, take a picture. What we need actually is like a photograph of high water on a fence. That is excellent. We can come back and document how high the water was above ground level, and we can build a community map. I run a program called Flood Information Systems, where we actually build out communities' flood history and also building elevations, and we can construct community maps to get a really good idea of what's flooded. So if you can safely document high water, it's a big help to us. Again, we need to know specifically, looking at a photo, how high did water get on a fence or on a, street sign, things like that. But never put yourself in harm's way to get a flood picture or an observation. Often, if you can notice how high water gets on stairs, let's say you live in an elevated house and you say, this is my address, and the water got up to the first stair, we can absolutely pinpoint how high the water was and make a community flood map from that. Sounds like they have howling wind as well over on Bolivar Peninsula. I'm driving around Galveston Island. I'm up by the seawall, and one reason I'm doing that, we're getting some pretty big wind impacts by the seawall. I'm also on higher ground. We definitely know the lower levels, lower elevations of Galveston are starting to flood. And, generally I try not to be in flood water. So that's a concern. It seems like right now we're seeing some flood water in the lower areas of Galveston. It looks like we have some power outages on Galveston. I saw that for sure. It looks like farther west, we're losing more power. You can see the winds are kind of blowing here. We still have a strong east wind. This will really turn to be a strong south wind. Actually, the ponding of water here on Seawall Boulevard, it's really coming down hard when you have ponding of water here. Really blowing here from east to west. This is an onshore wind. Everyone stay safe. Use your situational awareness. If you can stay away from big trees, that's a good idea. I think there have been some scattered trees down here on Galveston Island. You can really see it howling here though. Watching live coverage of Hurricane Nicholas making landfall along the Texas coast. We're expecting conditions to really start deteriorating for our friends up in Houston. As of midnight, sustained winds at Hobby Airport were only 18 miles an hour. Here in the island, they were sustained in the 30s with gusts in the 50s. Now we're getting really tropical storm force winds here on the coast. That's coming towards Metro Houston really in the upcoming hours. I think closer to dawn, Metro Houston really starts taking on some stronger winds for sure. I would expect even widespread power outages in the southern part of Houston. So, be careful if you're up there in Pearland, our friends in Friendswood and places like that. There's a storm chaser, I believe. Hey, thanks everyone for staying tuned. A lot of people have been thanking me for the live feed. Again, I document storms very safely. I always use situational awareness. I'm in my hometown here of Galveston, so I know really what to expect. I'm going to close out the video here, let you watch and see what the storm conditions look like here in Galveston. I'm going to drive other parts of the island as well, see if I can see if trees are down at all. Thanks, Jenny. That's a good mention there. Sometimes I forget to eat and drink during hurricanes. It's always good to stay hydrated. Everyone, if you're in Houston Metro, I would recommend you keep a flashlight handy. I'm expecting widespread power outages up there closer to dawn. This is what it looks like in Galveston. These are strong winds, tropical storm force winds here on the island. Looks like water's rising on the strand. Gracias, Rome. This is really the worst of it here in Galveston. I think this squall is going to set up over the next, I don't know, 1 to 3 hours. And then I think this is really the worst that we're going to see. We do have some flooding in low-lying areas here of Galveston. We have 153 people here. Sounds like power's out in Dickinson, according to Barry. So tree limbs on cars in the West End. So watch out for that. Use your situational awareness. We're definitely expecting tree limbs to come down. Some kind of stick or something just hit the vehicle I'm in. We're getting some pretty squally weather here along the upper Texas coast. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. This was an erratic storm. The center of circulation moved around several times, and it tracked farther east than originally predicted, bringing, stronger winds than we thought. Typically, we look for a wind threshold of 50 knots or 57 miles an hour. Once we get over that, we start seeing tree falls, widespread power outages, siding off houses, and shingles off houses. And the wind is really picking up. Everybody, I'm going to take a little break. I'll be back here. Stay tuned to CNC social media. I'm going to be up all night. I'm in my hometown. I'm a hurricane scientist, and here's a hurricane. So I'm going to be documenting this very frequently. Keep the comments, though, on the post. Even though I'm going to sign off here pretty soon, you can continue to comment, and this is a good place for community interaction. So it's important that we stay connected. If you have questions, you can just post them on the feed. We have hundreds of people, really thousands of people following this. So if you have further comments, post them on this video, and I'll be back here before long doing another live. This is Dr. Hurricane Hal Needham signing off from Galveston, where we have tropical storm force wind gusts for sure on the island. I'll be back in a little bit right here on CNC social media.